Okay, so I'm going to get started on this wrap. Hold on. I'm gonna get started on this wrap knit dress, and I'm gonna start off with my foundation knit patterns, and we're gonna go from there. Wish me luck. You can basically start with a block and then just alter it from there. So I am going to take in some from the front and the side. I didn't do that on the ruche dress. I didn't do it effectively on the ruche dress, so I'm going to do that here. I took it in on the hip on the ruche dress, but not on the other underarm. So I am going to take it in on the underarm, which means the sleeve cap will also have to change. Hey guys, welcome to another video. My name is Delaya from thedelayab.com, and I'm a fashion designer who's been doing a lot of sewing projects lately. So like I mentioned, I'm doing a wrap dress, which actually turns into a faux wrap dress, but right now I'm editing the pattern. In this step, I am actually doing the style lines of the pattern. I have made an empire, which is an empire waistline, and from there I am marking my bust radius, which is the measurement from your nipple to under your bust. And basically it's a placement of where your boob is and how the style line will lay across your bust. And I'm lengthening the center front so it goes across the body and not just stop at the center front. The fabric that I'm using is a sweater knit. I've had it in my stash for a couple years now. I think I got it from work when they were tossing it. Back at the beginning of quarantine, when I did my stash inventory video, which I'll link to in the description box, I was considering doing a wrap dress with this fabric, and that's actually what's happening. Here I'm cutting the pieces out. There weren't that many pattern pieces. In total there are about 8 patterns, and 3 of those were also used for interfacing. And cut total there were 17 pieces and 5 interfacing pieces. Overall it was pretty easy to cut, but it was my first time working with sweater knit, so I definitely picked up a few lessons while doing it. So first I'd say you want to make sure you have your notches marked, whether you use the triangular notches or like slits in the fabric for notches. That way you know the correct areas line up with the correct areas, because sweater net, when it's relaxed, it will skew and drape and all that, so you just want to make sure everything lines up where it's supposed to. Second, when you're cutting, you want to make sure that your scissors are angled downwards, like you intentionally want to lift the back of your scissors up at more of an incline and make sure the point is resting on the table so you catch less snags and less of the knit stitches as you're going by. I know I caught a few and it slowed me down and it was rather annoying. And lastly, if you're cutting multiple layers, just make sure everything lies out flat and is relaxed. That's normally what you do with all fabric, but I think it's better to double check with knit because of the texture, and it can easily get caught up and bump up in areas, so just make sure everything is laid out flat. Next, once everything is cut out, I prep the pieces by putting interfacing on them. The pieces that need interfacing are the facing pieces. That's it. So I'm going piece by piece. I'm using scrap interfacing, so the good thing about that is that interfacing doesn't have to be cut on a grain. So I'm just cutting out little sections at a time and putting it on the facing, trimming it, ironing down a section, and moving on to the next section. Actually good because I didn't have to lift the sweater knit piece, and because when I lift it, the width might have changed because, you know, stretched, elongated, blah blah blah. So keeping it flat kept the width of the facing that it was supposed to be. And now I'm sewing the facing pieces together, right sides together, front facing to back facing. And then I'll be overlocking the exposed edge of the facing piece so it'll be clean finished. It was at this point that I realized that I didn't cut enough waistbands. For the wrap skirt, you're supposed to have 3 waistbands, 1 for the back and 2 for the 2 fronts. But I only had 2 at the end, and I threw my fabric away prematurely, so I couldn't go back and recut it. So now I'm going back and joining the front and back pieces together so I can put in the facings. So this is how we go from a wrap skirt to a faux wrap skirt. So to accommodate this design change from a wrap dress to a faux wrap dress, I had to cut my facing. The facing was basically a long piece that would accommodate the skirt, the waistband, and the neckline. But because it's now a faux wrap skirt, I had to cut the facing at the, we'll say at the end of the neckline, and for the skirt, so they can be like separate pieces. So here I'm pinning the facing to the front neckline and the back neck, making sure not to stretch anything or change the shape in any way. And once pinned in place, we'll do a little overlocking. And for the front skirt opening, we'll do the same thing. I pin the facing pieces to the skirt. When you're doing anything on a curve, you want to make sure that you're not stretching or moving anything out of place, that it's relaxed, and that it fits like it should. Okay, so I know I said that you're supposed to iron this and press it, and you are, but because I'm under a time constraint, I am going to skip that step. What you would normally do is you would press the seam allowance. This is the seam allowance right now, it's the overlock seam allowance. And you would press it to the side of the facing just so it lays down all nice and crisp. And then you're going to edge stitch. It's about a 1/16 of an inch, an eighth of an inch from the seam, so this part will lay down nice and flat. I'm going to edge stitch on this side so I can have the seam line actually guide me on where I should go. I'm going to put the seam line in the center of the groove of the foot, so I always want my seam line to be in the center of the foot. My needle I have positioned to the right of the seam, so it's going to catch the seam allowance underneath the face. Forward twice, do my back stitch, and there we go. I'm going to hold it. I'm holding the seam allowance on the back to make sure that it is on the right side and that it is getting caught in the stitch. Make sure you keep the excess of this out of the way so it doesn't get caught. Now if this were pressed, the seam would be nice and flat, like you wouldn't even see this bulkiness right here. But okay. Alright, so what this edge stitch does is it makes it easier for the facing to remain on the opposite side, so you just have a nice, clean, curved finish on your skirt. So this I will press down to make sure it lays flat. It won't skew that. So you have a nice, clean edge to finish your skirt. Now I'm pressing the facing. When you do it, you want to make sure that none of the facing is seen from the front. So just roll and make sure it's pressed down. I did the skirt facings and the neckline facing, and now I'm pressing the belt seam. You didn't see me sew it earlier, but it got sewn. And we are lining up the front bodice to the only remaining waistband. This is where notches were crucial. I actually cut the dress on the cross grain and cut the waistband on the grain, so stretch is a little different from both angles. So lining up the notches was very helpful. Also, I matched the stripe going down the center front, so also notches, VIP. So I overlocked that seam, and next up is matching the waistband to the skirts. You want to pay attention to the layers because one side is supposed to open, I use air quotes, one side is supposed to open and the other side is just supposed to be a layer. So pay attention to how you're laying it out. Once that's pinned and in place, I will overlock that seam too. The front and the back of the dress are together. All those pieces are basically like one front, one back. So now it's time to put the sleeves in, and I'm going to do it the same way I did for the long sleeve shirts and the turtleneck. I'm going to put the sleeve in at the shoulder, and then I'm going to do the whole side seam of the dress and the underarms and the underarm seam of the sleeve. Again, this is the cheat way to put sleeves in on knit garments. You sew the shoulder seam first, and then you sew the underarm of the sleeve and go through the body of the garment. So with this is the dress. So I sew the sleeve of the garment and follow through to the body of the dress, and your sleeve is in. And now let's finish this baby up. Right now I'm hemming the sleeve. I turned under 3/4 of an inch, and I chose to do a straight stitch because I'm grown and I do what I want, but I'd recommend a zigzag stitch because it stretches with the fabric. After that, I used a sewing machine to hem the dress, so I turned it under 1/4 of an inch, and then I did a double fold, so I did it 1/4 of an inch, fold under again 1/4 of an inch for a 1/2 inch hem, and I stitched that down. To finish off the facing, you can go one or two ways. One, you can stitch the facing down with your sewing machine. I didn't want to do this because I didn't want the top stitch to be seen on the front side, so I decided to hand finish it, and I'm just doing a simple whip stitch, catching like one thread of the face or the main part of the skirt and stitching it to the facing. That way the facing will stay in place and won't roll over onto the front, and it'll just be a nicer, cleaner finish. For the belt, I actually had to cut one side down to match the other because it was originally supposed to wrap around my body. One side was longer, so I had to cut that down. After that, I sew them together, right sides together, and then I spread them open and put them at the point on the waistband where it would essentially tie. When I put them in a place that I was satisfied with, I pinned them and essentially just top stitched them down to that spot. I tried to do it to where the seam allowance wouldn't be shown or wouldn't be messy. And here we have it. The faux wrap sweater knit dress is complete. Overall, I like it. Things didn't work out how they were supposed to. The waistband is supposed to be under my breasts, but it is basically at my waist, which I'm thinking the fabric kind of stretched to that because I didn't cut these parts on the straight grain, so it's probably stretching, which I'm fine with. When I first put it on, I didn't think I executed the belt correctly. Like, I felt it was droopy and all that. So I switched it and tied it on the opposite side. But now that I see it in the video, I now hate it on the opposite side, so I'll probably keep it on the regular side and call it a day. But yeah, overall I like it. I will have to wear a slip with it or something underneath because I did forget that sweater knit is basically an open knit and you can see through it. But other than that, I love it. It's great. So if you like this video and you like watching me make things and you like how this turned out, go on and watch last week's video of me making a ruche dress. Until next time, guys. Bye.